A 68-year-old decorated veteran, a man who left a piece of his youth in a war zone, sat quietly in seat 4A. He had paid for his premium ticket fair and square, but to the airline supervisor marching down the aisle, he was merely a nuisance to be removed. What happened next wasn't just a corporate blunder. It was an explosive confrontation that caused an entire Boeing 777 to strike. This is the unforgettable story of Flight 412. The fluorescent lights of Chicago O'Hare International Airport buzzed with a low electric hum, casting a sterile glare over the sea of exhausted travelers. It was a frigid Tuesday evening in late November, the kind of night where the wind off Lake Michigan rattled the heavy glass panes of the terminal. At gate K14, Arthur Pendleton sat straight-backed in a molded plastic chair, his hands resting on the curved handle of a polished oak cane. Arthur was a man carved from granite and patience. At 68, his hair was a close-cropped silver, his jawline sharp, and his dark skin weathered by decades of sun and service. Pinned discreetly to the lapel of his tailored, albeit dated, tweed jacket was a small silver insignia, a testament to his years in the United States Army Rangers. Arthur wasn't a wealthy man. He had spent his post-military years managing a hardware store in South Side Chicago, saving every spare dollar. Tonight, however, was the culmination of 3 years of meticulous planning. He was flying on Transcontinental Airlines Flight 412 to London Heathrow to walk his only granddaughter, Chloe, down the aisle. Because of the shrapnel that had permanently mangled his right femur decades ago, sitting in a cramped economy seat for 8 hours wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a medical impossibility. The risk of deep vein thrombosis and the sheer agony of his joints locking up had prompted him to drain a significant portion of his savings. He had paid for a first-class lie-flat seat, cash and miles totally confirmed. He held his boarding pass loosely between his fingers, occasionally glancing at the bold printed text, Seat 4A, Business Elite. Behind the boarding podium stood Beatrice Covington, the senior gate agent. Beatrice was a woman wound tighter than a watch spring. Her uniform was impeccably pressed, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe bun that seemed to pull the skin of her forehead taut. She was frantically typing on her keyboard, the harsh clacking echoing over the murmurs of the waiting passengers. Transcontinental Airlines had been bleeding money, and the corporate mandates coming down from the executives were brutal. Overbooking was standard operating procedure, and VIP appeasement was the ultimate law. Group 1, Business Elite and Diamond Medallion members, you may now board, Beatrice's voice crackled over the intercom, devoid of any warmth. Arthur rose slowly, putting his weight onto his good leg before leaning into his cane. He gathered his small leather duffel bag and made his way toward the priority lane. He wasn't the typical business traveler. He wasn't wearing a 3-piece suit or staring intensely into a smartphone. He just looked like an old, dignified grandfather. As Arthur handed his boarding pass to Beatrice, the scanner emitted a harsh, discordant beep. The LED light flashed red. Beatrice frowned, not looking up at Arthur, but glaring at her screen. Sir, step aside. There's a flag on your reservation. A flag? Arthur asked, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded immediate respect. I confirmed the reservation this morning. Seat 4A, Beatrice finally looked up. Her eyes quickly scanned him. The cane, the tweed jacket, the worn leather bag. In that microsecond, a judgment was made. A biased, deeply flawed calculation based on optics rather than data. The system shows an equipment change, Mr. Pendleton. We've had to reallocate some seating. Please step out of the line so I can board the other passengers. Ma'am, with all due respect, I paid for a business class fare specifically for my leg. I physically cannot fly in a standard seat for an international flight," Arthur explained calmly, holding his ground. Beatrice let out an exasperated sigh, treating him not as a paying customer, but as a vagrant loitering in a luxury boutique. "Mr. Pendleton, I don't have time to argue with you. Step aside, or I will call security before you even set foot on the jet bridge." The threat hung in the air. A few passengers behind Arthur shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Arthur's jaw tightened. He knew this game. He had lived through an era where his mere presence in certain spaces was deemed an offense. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick stack of printed papers. The confirmation emails, the receipt of payment, the medical note from his VA doctor. He placed them deliberately over her scanner. "I am not moving from this line until you print my boarding pass for the seat I purchased. You have my confirmation number right there." Beatrice's face flushed with anger. She aggressively hit a few keys on her terminal. The machine whirred and a new boarding pass spat out. She snatched it and shoved it toward him. "Seat 4A for now. Board the aircraft." Arthur took the paper, offered a polite but icy "thank you," and began his slow walk down the jet bridge, unaware that the real battle had yet to begin. The interior of the Boeing 777 was an oasis of manufactured luxury. The business elite cabin was bathed in soft blue ambient lighting, smelling faintly of citrus air freshener and expensive leather. Arthur found his suite 4A by the window. He carefully stowed his cane in the overhead compartment, letting out a quiet breath of relief as he eased his aching frame into the plush, wide seat. He stretched his damaged leg out, the motorized footrest extending to support his knee. For the first time all day, the sharp, biting pain in his hip began to dull. He closed his eyes, picturing Chloe in her wedding dress, reminding himself that the indignity at the gate was a small price to pay for what awaited him in London. Quite the gauntlet out there today, huh? Arthur opened his eyes to see the man settling into seat 4B across the narrow aisle. He was a younger man, perhaps early 40s, wearing a tailored navy suit with the jacket casually draped over his arm. He had sharp, observant blue eyes and an easy smile. "It seems the airlines have forgotten they are in the hospitality business," Arthur replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "David Ross," the man said, extending a hand. "Corporate litigation. Though today, I'm just a guy trying to get to a merger meeting without losing my mind." Arthur shook his hand firmly. "Arthur Pendleton. Retired." David's eyes dropped briefly to the silver pin on Arthur's lapel. "Rangers, lead the way, sir. My older brother was 75th Regiment. Served in Fallujah." "Karengal for me," Arthur nodded respectfully. "A long time ago." In seat 3A, just in front of Arthur, a young woman was setting up a miniature tripod on her tray table. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, a digital journalist and travel blogger with a significant online following. She was quietly adjusting her camera settings, but her ears were open. She had noticed the interaction at the gate, the dismissive way the gate agent had treated Arthur, and it had left a sour taste in her mouth. She subtly angled her phone so the screen mirrored the aisle behind her. As the economy passengers continued to file past the business class cabin, dragging their carry-ons, a sudden commotion erupted at the front of the plane. "I don't care about the system glitch, Greg. I always sit in 4A. It's my preferred seat." The voice was loud, whiny, and dripping with aggressive entitlement. Striding into the cabin was a man in his late 20s, wearing designer sunglasses indoors, a cashmere sweater draped over his shoulders, and an aura of insufferable arrogance. This was Connor Harrington. His father was a senior board member of the airline's parent company, a fact Connor ensured everyone within a 50-foot radius knew at all times. Following closely behind him was Greg, the lead flight attendant, looking pale and panicked. "Mr. Harrington, I apologize, but 4A is occupied. We have a lovely suite available for you in 2F. "I don't want a middle aisle suite, Greg. I want the window. Move whoever is in it. I have a board meeting in London, and I need my specific environment to sleep. My father practically owns this metal tube." Greg swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward row 4. He saw Arthur sitting quietly, watching the display. Greg knew the protocol. Do not upset the board members. Do not upset the VIPs. He keyed his radio. "Beatrice, I need you down here. We have a situation with Mr. Harrington." Less than 2 minutes later, Beatrice Covington marched down the jet bridge and onto the plane, her face flushed, holding a new boarding pass in her hand. She took one look at Connor Harrington, offered a sickly sweet, apologetic smile, and then turned her gaze to row 4. Her eyes locked onto Arthur, and her expression hardened into a mask of cold authority. "Mr. Pendleton," Beatrice said loudly, breaking the quiet hum of the cabin. She stopped right next to his seat, looking down her nose at him. Arthur looked up from his magazine. "Yes, there has been a critical error in our manifest," Beatrice lied, her voice projecting so the entire cabin could hear. "This seat is reserved for a priority global VIP. You were upgraded by mistake. I'm going to need you to gather your belongings immediately." The cabin went dead silent. David Ross stopped typing on his laptop. Sarah Jenkins hit the record button on her phone, slipping it discreetly against the window shade. "I wasn't upgraded," Arthur said smoothly, his voice steady. "I paid full fare. Miles and cash. I have the receipts." "The system voided your payment due to a security flag, sir," Beatrice countered, inventing policy on the spot. "You are currently occupying a seat you have no legal right to. We have secured a seat for you in the main cabin. Seat 42J. It is a middle seat near the rear lavatories. It is the last seat on the plane. You will take it, or you will be deplaned." Arthur stared at her. Seat 42J, a middle seat in the back of the plane. With his leg, sitting there for 8 hours wouldn't just be painful. It would result in severe medical complications. He would have to be carried off the plane in London. "I am not moving," Arthur said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. But the absolute ironclad finality in his tone sent a chill down the aisle. "I paid for this seat. I need this seat for medical reasons related to my military service. If Mr. Harrington would like to fly to London, he can take whatever seat is available." Connor Harrington scoffed loudly from the galley. "Are you kidding me? You're letting this guy dictate terms. Just kick him off." Beatrice leaned in closer to Arthur, dropping the customer service facade entirely. "Listen to me very carefully. You do not belong here. You are holding up my flight. Move to the back, or I will have the police drag you out of here in handcuffs. Your choice." The silence in the business elite cabin shattered. "Excuse me," David Ross said, standing up from seat 4B. He buttoned his suit jacket, transforming instantly from a tired traveler into a formidable litigator. He stepped into the aisle, blocking Beatrice's access to Arthur. "I think you need to lower your voice and step back from my client." Arthur looked at David, mildly surprised. He hadn't hired a lawyer, but he wasn't going to interrupt. Beatrice blinked, thrown off balance. "Your client, sir, this is an airline matter. This is a breach of contract, a violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, and grounds for a massive civil rights lawsuit." David fired back, his voice crisp and carrying perfectly to the surrounding rows. "Mr. Pendleton purchased this ticket. He has documentation of his disability. You are demanding he vacate a paid medical accommodation to appease a healthy passenger simply because of nepotism. If you lay one finger on him, or if you call security to forcibly remove an elderly disabled veteran who is not causing a disturbance, I will personally see to it that Transcontinental Airlines is on the front page of every major newspaper by morning. In seat 3A, Sarah Jenkins adjusted her phone. She was broadcasting live. Airline trying to forcefully remove disabled black veteran for wealthy VIP. Read the caption she quickly typed out to her 800,000 followers. Beatrice was trembling now, a mix of fury and panic. She looked back at Connor, who was tapping his foot impatiently. She was caught between a corporate scion who could fire her with a phone call, and a lawyer who was quoting federal law. She chose the path of arrogance. "I am the ground operations manager," Beatrice stated, her voice shrill. "Under FAA regulations, the flight crew has final authority over seating. If a passenger refuses a crew member's instruction, it is a federal offense." Greg, the flight attendant, flinched. "Yes, Beatrice. Tell this passenger he is interfering with a flight crew." Greg looked at Arthur. He looked at the silver Ranger pin. He looked at Arthur's stiff, extended leg. Greg's grandfather had served. A heavy pit formed in his stomach. "Beatrice, maybe we should just put Mr. Harrington in 2F. It's a very nice seat." "Do your job, Greg, or you're fired," Connor snapped from the front. Beatrice pulled a heavy black walkie-talkie from her belt. "O'Hare Security, this is gate K14, flight 412. We have a code 3 in the premium cabin. I need officers on board immediately for passenger extraction. Male, uncooperative, aggressive." "Aggressive," a woman in row 5 called out. "He hasn't even raised his voice. You're the one yelling. Mind your business." Beatrice snapped back. Arthur slowly reached over and touched David's arm. "Mr. Ross, thank you, but I don't want you getting arrested on my account." "Arthur," David said softly, looking down at him. "My brother came home with severe PTSD. He was treated like garbage by the system. I am not letting them do this to you. Not today." Heavy footsteps echoed on the metal jet bridge. 3 burly airport security officers, clad in neon yellow vests and duty belts, boarded the plane. Their hands hovered near their utility pouches. They looked tense. "What's the situation, Bea?" the lead officer, a man named Miller, asked as he pushed his way down the aisle. "That man," Beatrice pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. "He is trespassing. His ticket has been revoked. He is refusing to leave the aircraft. Remove him." Officer Miller looked at Arthur. He saw an old man with a cane. "Sir, I need you to stand up and come with us." "Officer," Arthur said evenly, "if I stand up, I will not be able to walk all the way back to the terminal. My leg is locking up. I have a valid boarding pass. They are trying to give my seat to that young man over there." Miller looked back at Connor, then to Beatrice. "Bay, is this an overbooking issue? It is an operational necessity." "Remove him," she shrieked. "Sir," Miller sighed, clearly hating his job in this moment. "If you don't stand up, we are legally required to physically remove you. Please don't make us do this. It's going to hurt." Arthur's eyes hardened. He had stared down enemy fire in a foreign jungle. He wasn't going to be bullied by a panicked middle manager and a spoiled rich kid. "I fought for this country. I bled for this country. I bought this seat so I could watch my granddaughter get married. I am not moving." Officer Miller nodded grimly. "All right, let's go." 2 officers lunged forward. One grabbed Arthur's left arm, the other grabbed his right. Arthur let out a sharp, involuntary gasp of pain as they yanked him forward, jarring his shattered hip. "Hey, let him go," David yelled, physically stepping between the officers and the seat. One of the officers shoved David hard into the overhead bin. "Assault!" Sarah Jenkins screamed from row 3, holding her phone up openly now. "You are assaulting them. I have it all on video. Over 50,000 people are watching this live right now." The word "live" made the officers freeze for a fraction of a second. But Beatrice was past the point of no return. "Take the phone," she ordered. "Don't you dare touch her." A man in row 6 bellowed, standing up. It was a broad-shouldered man wearing a Chicago Fire Department jacket. He stepped into the aisle. Suddenly, the narrow aisle of the business elite cabin was a powder keg. Passengers were out of their seats. The officers were struggling with Arthur, who was groaning in pain, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests to anchor himself. Connor Harrington was watching with a smug, detached amusement, sipping a pre-flight champagne he had snatched from the galley. "Stop!" The voice boomed from the front of the cabin. It didn't come from a passenger or a flight attendant or security. It came from the cockpit. Captain Reynolds, a 25-year veteran of the airline, stood in the doorway of the flight deck. His face was a mask of absolute fury. The 4 stripes on his shoulders gleamed under the cabin lights. He marched down the aisle, the crowd parting for him. He looked at the officers holding Arthur. He looked at David Ross nursing a bruised shoulder. He looked at Sarah recording. Finally, he looked at Beatrice. "What in God's name is happening on my airplane?" Captain Reynolds demanded, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of absolute command. "Let the man go," Captain William Reynolds ordered, his voice echoing in the confined space. He didn't yell, but the sheer, unwavering authority of a man who had logged 30,000 hours in the sky made the security officers instinctively release their grip. Arthur slumped back into seat 4A, chest heaving, his hand instinctively gripping his damaged right hip. David Ross immediately knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "Captain," Beatrice began, her voice shrill, trying to regain control of the narrative. "This passenger is combative and trespassing. We have an operational mandate." "Shut up, Beatrice," Reynolds snapped, not even looking at her. He crouched down to eye level with Arthur. "Sir, are you injured?" "I will be if they try to drag me out of this chair again," Arthur grunted, his face pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He held up his crumpled boarding pass. "I paid for this seat." Seat 4A, Reynolds took the pass. He examined it, then looked at the manifest printed on a long sheet of thermal paper he held in his left hand. He scanned the lines, his brow furrowing. "You're confirmed. Paid in full. No security flag on the flight deck manifest." The captain stood up slowly, turning his gaze toward Beatrice, and then, finally, to Connor Harrington, who was leaning against the bulkhead near the galley, arms crossed, looking thoroughly bored. "Mr. Harrington," Reynolds said, recognizing the young man immediately. Everyone at Transcontinental knew the Harrington family. They were a corporate plague, known for demanding the world and firing anyone who didn't deliver it on a silver platter. "I have a perfectly good suite for you in 2F. Please take your seat so we can push back. We are already 20 minutes delayed." Connor scoffed, adjusting his designer sunglasses. "I don't think so, Bill. I sleep on the left side of the aircraft. It's an inner ear thing. I need 4A. It's my father's mandate that board members and their families have preferred seating. Your father's mandates do not supersede federal aviation regulations," Reynolds countered, taking a step toward the young heir. "I am the pilot in command of this aircraft. As long as those doors are open, I dictate who flies and who doesn't. Mr. Pendleton has a paid ticket and a medical necessity. You have a preference. Take 2F or take a flight tomorrow." The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Sarah Jenkins panned her camera from the cheering passengers back to Connor, whose smug smile instantly vanished, replaced by a deep, ugly scowl. "You're making a massive mistake, Reynolds," Connor sneered. He pulled a sleek, silver smartphone from his cashmere sweater pocket. "Let's see how much you love that captain's hat." He dialed a number, hitting the speakerphone button so the entire premium cabin could hear the ringing. On the second ring, a crisp, authoritative voice answered. "Connor, I'm in a meeting." "What is it?" "Dad," Connor whined, his voice dropping its false bravado and adopting the petulant tone of a spoiled child. "I'm on flight 412. The crew is refusing to seat me in 4A. They gave it to some old guy who won't move, and the pilot is threatening to kick me off." A heavy sigh echoed through the phone speaker. Richard Harrington, Executive Vice President of Transcontinental Airlines. "Put the captain on." Connor smirked, holding the phone out toward Reynolds. "For you, Captain." Reynolds' jaw tightened. He took the phone. "Mr. Harrington, this is Captain Reynolds. We have a confirmed disabled passenger in 4A. He paid full fare. Removing him would be a violation of the Air Carrier Access Act and a PR nightmare. Bill." Richard Harrington's voice was like ice cracking over a frozen lake. "I do not care about the Air Carrier Access Act. I do not care about PR. I care that my son is comfortable on his red-eye to London. You are currently presiding over a plane that operates under my budget. Remove the passenger." "Sir, as the pilot in command, I deem the removal of Mr. Pendleton a safety and security risk. I will not authorize it." There was a 5-second pause. When Richard Harrington spoke again, the venom in his voice was palpable. "Captain Reynolds, you are 59 years old. You are 1 year away from your full executive pension. If you do not have that man off my plane in the next 3 minutes, I will terminate your contract effective immediately. You will not fly for Transcontinental again. You will lose your pension, your travel privileges, and your reputation. Hand the phone back to my son, tell security to do their jobs, and fly the damn plane." The line went dead. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Every passenger in the first 5 rows had heard the exchange. The blatant corruption, the sheer arrogance of the ultimatum, hung in the air like toxic smoke. Reynolds lowered the phone. He looked at Connor, whose smug smile had returned. He looked at Beatrice, who looked vindicated. And finally, he looked back at Arthur. The captain's shoulders slumped. 30 years of impeccable service. Thousands of flights. And it was all going to end right here, in the jetway of Gate K14, because of a spoiled millionaire's son. "Captain," Arthur said quietly, breaking the silence. He had heard the entire conversation. He knew what a pension meant. He knew what it was like to serve an institution for decades, only to be cast aside. "Don't throw your life away for me." "Mr. Pendleton," Reynolds choked out, his voice thick with suppressed rage and shame. I have my orders." "Take him," Beatrice commanded the security officers, her voice dripping with triumph. Officer Miller stepped forward again, looking utterly defeated. "Sir, please." Arthur looked at his own shaking hands. He felt the shooting pain radiating from his hip down to his knee. He looked at the officers. If they dragged him, his hip might dislocate. The surgery alone would take months to recover from. He would miss Chloe's wedding. He would miss the only thing that mattered to him. He had fought for his country. He had stood his ground. But the machine he was fighting today wasn't an army. It was a corporation without a soul. "Don't touch me," Arthur rasped. He placed both hands on the armrests. He gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw popping. Slowly, agonizingly, he began to stand. His right leg trembled violently, threatening to give out, but he forced his weight onto his left. He reached up, his hand shaking, and retrieved his oak cane from the overhead bin. "I'll walk," Arthur said, his voice barely above a whisper, stripping away the last of his dignity to preserve his physical health. "I'll get off your plane." Arthur took one agonizing step into the aisle. The silence in the cabin was no longer tense. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of collective shame. To watch a decorated veteran, a man who required a cane to walk, be bullied out of his paid seat by a smirking aristocrat was a scene so grotesque it defied logic. As Arthur took a second step, leaning heavily on his cane, a hand shot out and gripped his shoulder. It was David Ross. The corporate lawyer had a look in his eyes that was equal parts fury and absolute resolve. "Hold on, Arthur," David said softly. David turned to Beatrice. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten a lawsuit this time. He simply reached into the overhead bin, pulled down his leather garment bag, and threw it over his shoulder. "If he doesn't fly, I don't fly," David stated loudly. He looked at Connor Harrington. "Enjoy the extra legroom, you parasitic little brat." David stepped out of his row, standing shoulder to shoulder with Arthur. "Mr. Ross, you are forfeiting a non-refundable business class ticket," Beatrice warned, her eyes widening slightly at the unexpected variable. "We will not rebook you. Keep the money. I'll buy a ticket on Delta. Let's go, Arthur." "I'll help you up the jet bridge," David said, offering his arm. "Wait," the word came from row 3. Sarah Jenkins snapped her tripod shut. She grabbed her backpack and slung her camera around her neck. She looked directly into her phone lens, still broadcasting to over 100,000 live viewers. "You guys seeing this?" Sarah said to her audience. "Transcontinental Airlines just threatened to fire their own captain to let a billionaire's kid steal a seat from a disabled vet. I'm not giving this company another dime of my money, and neither should you." Sarah stepped into the aisle, standing behind David. "I'm with you, Mr. Pendleton." Beatrice's mouth opened, but no words came out. The security officers stood frozen, unsure of how to police a voluntary disembarkation. Then came the voice from row 6. Thomas Kelly, the broad-shouldered Chicago firefighter, stood up. He looked back at the packed economy cabin behind him. He raised his voice, a booming baritone used to cutting through the roar of sirens and flames. "Hey, listen up back there." Thomas yelled down the long tube of the 777. They just kicked a senior citizen, a veteran, out of his seat so a board member's kid could have a window view. They threatened to strip the pilot's pension if he didn't comply. Are we really going to sit here and let them fly us to London like a bunch of sheep? A murmur rippled through the economy cabin. A woman in row 12 stood up. "He's right, that's disgusting. I'm not flying with these scumbags." A man in row 18 shouted. Thomas Kelly grabbed his duffel bag. "I'm walking. Who's with me?" The response wasn't a murmur. It was an avalanche. Seatbelts unclicked in a synchronized wave of metallic clacks. Overhead bins were thrown open. The narrow aisles instantly choked with passengers grabbing their carry-ons, their coats, their dignity. "What are you doing?" Beatrice shrieked, panic finally bleeding through her icy facade as she watched the entire economy cabin rise as one. "Sit down, all of you. You will not get refunds." "Shove your refunds, lady." Thomas Kelly barked, pushing past her into the business elite section. He walked right up to Connor Harrington, towering over the younger man. Connor shrank back against the galley wall, his sunglasses slipping down his nose. Thomas pulled his boarding pass from his pocket, crumpled it into a tight ball, and bounced it off Connor's chest. "Trash!" he muttered before turning and joining the line forming behind Arthur. Suddenly, it was raining boarding passes. As passengers filed out of the business elite cabin, they stopped by seat 4A. One by one, they dropped their boarding passes onto the leather seat Connor Harrington had demanded. A young mother holding a toddler dropped hers. A pair of college students dropped theirs. An elderly British couple shook their heads in disgust and tossed their passes onto the growing pile. "This is mutiny," Beatrice screamed into her walkie-talkie. "Gate control, they're all leaving." "Stop them." "B, shut up," Officer Miller said quietly. He took his hand off his radio. He looked at Arthur, a profound respect in his eyes. He stepped back, clearing the way. "Have a good evening, sir. Thank you for your service." Captain Reynolds watched the mass exodus in stunned silence. He looked at the growing mountain of paper on seat 4A. He looked at Connor Harrington, who was now staring at the pile in pale, wide-eyed shock. A plane carrying nearly 300 passengers was emptying itself in a matter of minutes. Reynolds slowly unpinned his pilot's wings from his chest. He looked at Greg, the lead flight attendant. Greg didn't need to be told. He unclipped his company badge, tossed it onto the galley counter, and grabbed his roller bag. "I quit," Greg said calmly to Beatrice. "I've hated you for 3 years anyway." Reynolds walked down the aisle. He bypassed Beatrice. He bypassed Connor. He stopped right behind Arthur, David, and Sarah as they slowly made their way onto the jet bridge. "Captain?" Beatrice gasped, watching the pilot leave his post. "You can't leave. You have to fly the plane." Reynolds paused at the door. He looked back at the nearly empty cabin. The only passenger left was Connor Harrington, surrounded by a mountain of discarded tickets, sitting in the hollow shell of a multi-million-dollar aircraft that was going nowhere. "Tell Richard Harrington he can fly it himself," Reynolds said. And with that, the captain walked off his own ship. The jet bridge of Gate K-14 was a bottleneck of righteous indignation. 274 passengers poured out of the Boeing 777, dragging their luggage and buzzing with an adrenaline-fueled mixture of anger and disbelief. The terminal, usually a space of quiet exhaustion at this hour, transformed into a bustling command center. At the center of it all sat Arthur Pendleton. David Ross had found him a wheelchair near an empty gate desk, forcing the exhausted veteran to sit and elevate his throbbing right leg. Arthur looked around at the sea of stranded travelers. Some were businessmen missing crucial meetings. Others were families whose vacations were now in limbo. "I'm sorry," Arthur said softly, his deep voice laced with guilt as he looked up at David and Thomas Kelly, the firefighter who had sparked the mass exodus. "You all paid good money. You have places to be. You shouldn't have sacrificed your plans for me." Thomas crouched down, placing a heavy, reassuring hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Mr. Pendleton, my grandfather stormed the beaches of Normandy. If I sat on that plane and let some corporate parasite treat an army ranger like a piece of garbage, my old man would rise from his grave and beat me senseless. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." A few yards away, Sarah Jenkins was pacing. Her live stream had ended, but the metrics on her screen were terrifying in their scale. The broadcast hadn't just gone viral. It had detonated. The hashtag Flight 412 was trending #1 in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. Someone had clipped the exact moment Captain Reynolds was threatened with the loss of his pension, and that 60-second video was multiplying across Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit by the millions. Sarah walked over to David, holding up her phone. "Mr. Ross, you might want to see this. The internet has already identified Connor Harrington and his father. People are pulling up Transcontinental's SEC filings. The airline's social media pages are being absolutely nuked. It's a total PR bloodbath. David pulled out his own phone, a predatory smile spreading across his face. As a corporate litigator, he knew exactly how much damage a crisis of this magnitude could inflict on a publicly traded company. He opened his email and began drafting a preservation of evidence letter to Transcontinental's legal department, demanding all cockpit voice recordings, gate security footage, and internal communications regarding Flight 412. "Sarah, I need a copy of that raw video file right now," David said. "By tomorrow morning, Transcontinental is going to try to spin this. They're going to issue a statement saying there was a misunderstanding and that a passenger became disruptive. We need the undeniable truth anchored in the public record before their spin doctors even wake up." While the passengers organized in Chicago, a very different scene was unfolding 1,000 miles away in a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate in Dallas, Texas. Richard Harrington was jolted awake by the shrill ringing of his private cell phone. He checked the bedside clock, 1:15 a.m. The caller ID flashed the name of the CEO of Transcontinental Airlines, Bradley Hughes. Richard groaned, rubbed his eyes, and answered. "Brad, what's going on?" Turn on CNN, Hughes's voice wasn't just angry. It was a deadly, quiet hiss that made Richard's blood run cold. Right now, Richard grabbed the remote and flicked on the massive flat-screen television. The breaking news banner at the bottom of the screen read in bold red letters, "Airline mutiny. Passengers and pilot abandon flight over eviction of doled veteran." On the screen was Sarah's shaky cell phone footage. Richard watched in mounting horror as his own son, Connor, smirked in his cashmere sweater, while security officers grabbed the arms of a frail, elderly black man with a cane. But the real killing blow came seconds later. The news anchor played the audio of the phone call. The entire world heard Richard's own voice, dripping with aristocratic contempt. "I do not care about the Air Carrier Access Act. Remove the passenger." "Brad," Richard stammered, his throat instantly dry. "Brad, I can explain. Connor called me. He said the passenger was belligerent. You threatened to strip a decorated pilot of his pension on a recorded line to give your spoiled brat of a son a window seat," Hughes interrupted, his voice trembling with rage. "Do you have any idea what the pre-market trading looks like right now, Richard? Our stock is down 12% in the Asian markets, and Wall Street hasn't even opened. We're bleeding hundreds of millions of dollars in market cap because you treated our aircraft like your personal limousine. We can issue an apology. Offer the old man lifetime first-class tickets. It's too late for lifetime tickets," Hughes shouted, finally losing his temper. "The Secretary of Transportation just tweeted about an FAA investigation into our seating practices. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is already being tagged. You have single-handedly destroyed 3 years of brand rebuilding in exactly 4 minutes. You are suspended pending a board vote tomorrow morning. And tell that idiot son of yours to find his own way home." The line clicked dead. Richard Harrington sat in the dark, the glow of the television illuminating the total collapse of his empire. Back at O'Hare, the stranded passengers of Flight 412 were beginning to feel the exhaustion of their moral stand. It was past 2 in the morning. All the restaurants were closed. Children were sleeping on piles of coats. Arthur sat quietly in his wheelchair, clutching his boarding pass, the reality sinking in that he was going to miss Chloe's wedding rehearsal, and perhaps the wedding itself. Suddenly, a group of 5 people in crisp dark blue uniforms walked purposefully down the concourse. They bypassed the empty, abandoned Transcontinental podium at gate K14 and approached the crowd. The leader of the group was a tall man with silver hair and a warm, authoritative demeanor. He stopped in front of David and Arthur. He looked down at Arthur's ranger pin. "Mr. Pendleton?" the man asked. Arthur looked up. "Yes, my name is Jonathan Hayes. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Horizon Airlines," he said, naming Transcontinental's fiercest international competitor. "Our CEO saw a video of what happened to you online about an hour ago. He woke me up and told me to get down here." Jonathan gestured behind him to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the terminal. Gliding into the adjacent gate, bathed in the amber glow of the apron lights, was a gleaming, state-of-the-art Horizon Airlines Boeing 787 Dreamliner. "We had a spare aircraft sitting in the hangar for morning maintenance," Jonathan smiled. "We've fueled it, catered it, and I've just woken up a reserve crew who are practically sprinting through security to get here. Transcontinental might not want you, Mr. Pendleton, but Horizon Airlines would be deeply honored to fly you to London." The exhausted crowd fell completely silent. David Ross stood up. "Mr. Hayes, that's incredibly generous, but there are nearly 300 of us here. We don't have tickets for Horizon." "Mr. Ross, correct?" Jonathan reached out and shook the lawyer's hand. "I'm aware. That's why we aren't charging you. Any passenger holding a boarding pass for Transcontinental Flight 4112 is welcome to board our aircraft free of charge. Consider it a corporate courtesy, though I must insist on one condition." Jonathan looked back down at Arthur. "Mr. Pendleton gets the flagship suite in first class. And Captain Reynolds? If he's still around, I've been authorized to offer him a job on the spot." The terminal erupted into a deafening roar of cheers. Passengers hugged each other, tears streaming down the faces of stressed parents. Thomas Kelly let out a booming laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Arthur covered his face with his weathered hands, his shoulders shaking as the sheer relief and gratitude washed over him. The corporate machine had tried to crush him, but the humanity of strangers had lifted him up. The Horizon Airlines Boeing 787 Dreamliner didn't just fly. It glided over the Atlantic Ocean like a vessel of righteous victory. For the 274 passengers who had abandoned Transcontinental, this wasn't a standard international red-eye. It was an airborne celebration of collective defiance. Arthur Pendleton was gently escorted into the airline's flagship first-class suite, a space that resembled a five-star boutique hotel room far more than an airplane seat. Maria, the lead flight attendant, treated him with a reverence usually reserved for heads of state. She draped a heated, lavender-scented blanket over his shoulders, poured him a glass of vintage sparkling cider, and strategically placed custom memory foam wedges to support his damaged right hip. As the seat silently mechanically reclined into a perfectly flat bed, the agonizing, shooting pain that had gripped Arthur for the last 3 hours finally began to melt away into a dull, manageable ache. Just as the Dreamliner reached its cruising altitude of 40,000 feet, the cabin intercom crackled to life. But it wasn't the Horizon pilot speaking. It was Captain William Reynolds, who had accepted the offer to ride along in the cockpit's jump seat. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds." His familiar, steady voice resonated through the cabin, instantly hushing the murmuring passengers. "I have flown commercial airliners for over 3 decades. When I woke up today, I assumed I was nearing the quiet end of a long career. Tonight, my former employer demanded I compromise the safety and dignity of a disabled veteran to appease a corporate mandate. I thought my career was over when I refused. But you, every single one of you who stood up and walked off that aircraft, showed me that integrity still carries weight in this world. To Mr. Pendleton in seat 1A, thank you for your service, and thank you for holding the line. Next stop, London Heathrow. A thunderous round of applause erupted across all 3 cabins. Passengers raised their plastic cups and water bottles in a joyous toast. Hours later, the sun broke through the thick English fog as they touched down in London. Arthur walked off the plane leaning on his polished oak cane, feeling more rested than he had in years. He was flanked by David Ross and Sarah Jenkins, who had bonded over the ordeal and become his unofficial honor guard. Waiting anxiously at the international arrivals gate was his granddaughter, Chloe. When she spotted the silver-haired veteran, she dropped her purse, burst into tears, and rushed past the barrier to throw her arms around his neck. "Grandpa, I saw the news. The videos are everywhere. I was so terrified they had hurt you and you wouldn't make it," she sobbed, burying her face in his worn tweed jacket. "I promised your father I'd be here, sweetheart." Arthur smiled, his own eyes brimming with unshed tears as he held her tight. "I just had a little help from some new friends along the way." 2 days later, under the soaring, centuries-old stone arches of a cathedral in the Cotswolds, Arthur fulfilled his promise. His bad leg protested with every step, but his spirit was utterly unbreakable. Dressed in a sharply tailored tuxedo, he walked Chloe down the aisle. When the priest solemnly asked who gave the bride away, Arthur's deep, gravelly voice echoed through the ancient rafters with unwavering pride. It was, without question, the happiest moment of his life. While Arthur celebrated amidst ringing church bells in England, a brutal, catastrophic reckoning was ripping through the corporate headquarters of Transcontinental Airlines in Dallas, Texas. Monday morning brought a financial bloodbath the industry had never seen. The moment the New York Stock Exchange opened, Transcontinental's shares plummeted by a staggering 18%, evaporating billions in shareholder value in minutes. Sarah's viral video had crossed 50 million views. Global boycotts were trending, and major corporate accounts were publicly shredding their contracts to switch their loyalty to Horizon Airlines. An emergency session of the board of directors was convened. It was not a meeting. It was an execution. Richard Harrington sat at the massive mahogany table, pale and sweating, trying to defend his actions. But CEO Brad Hughes cut him off entirely. Richard was unceremoniously fired on the spot, because the recorded audio explicitly captured him ordering a violation of the Air Carrier Access Act. The board triggered a morals clause in his contract, completely stripping him of his $60 million golden parachute. His son, Connor, suffered a humiliation just as severe. Hours after the mass exodus in Chicago, Connor had been left sitting completely alone in the empty 777. Airport police eventually had to board the aircraft and formally escort the screaming, petulant heir off the plane. By Monday afternoon, Connor had become an international pariah. His trust fund was frozen pending legal reviews, and his lucrative nepotism-appointed board seats were evaporated. Beatrice Covington, the gate agent whose arrogance had lit the match, was intercepted by security the moment she arrived for her next shift. She was fired immediately, escorted out of O'Hare Terminal, with nothing but a cardboard box of her desk belongings, permanently blacklisted from the aviation industry. But the corporate cleanup wasn't enough to stop the legal hurricane David Ross unleashed. True to his word, the ruthless corporate litigator, working entirely pro bono, filed a monumental civil rights and breach of contract lawsuit against Transcontinental. Facing an unwinnable, highly publicized trial, the airline surrendered and settled out of court within 30 days. The terms of the settlement were historic. Beyond a massive, undisclosed 8-figure payout to Arthur, Transcontinental was legally forced to make a $10 million donation to the Wounded Warrior Project in Arthur's name. They were also mandated by the FAA to completely overhaul their passenger seating policies, stripping all executives and VIPs of the power to ever displace a ticketed, medical priority passenger again. Arthur Pendleton used a fraction of his settlement to outright purchase the Southside hardware store he had managed for decades. He didn't keep it for himself, though. He immediately turned it into a cooperative, gifting ownership shares to the loyal employees who had worked by his side. Horizon Airlines, recognizing a PR gold mine and genuinely respecting the man, gifted Arthur lifetime first-class travel, a perk he used exclusively to visit Chloe in London. 6 months later, a formal ceremony was held at Horizon's training center. Captain William Reynolds stood on a pristine stage, officially receiving his new wings as the chief pilot of the Horizon fleet. As the applause washed over the room, Reynolds looked down into the front row. Sitting there, dressed in a sharp suit, leaning comfortably on his polished oak cane, was Arthur. The veteran offered a slow, deeply respectful salute. Reynolds smiled and returned the nod. They were two men from entirely different worlds, permanently bound by a single night where they refused to bow to arrogance, proving that sometimes the good guys actually do win. True power doesn't sit in a corporate boardroom. It stands in the unity of everyday people who refuse to tolerate injustice. If Arthur's unyielding bravery and the incredible solidarity of Flight 412 restored your faith in humanity, hit that like button right now. Have you ever witnessed a corporation get a taste of its own medicine or seen a crowd stand up for what's right? Tell us your amazing stories in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video to honor our veterans, and subscribe to the channel for more jaw-dropping, real-life stories where the good guys actually win. See you in the next one.